Welcome to the Better Two podcast. I'm your host, Donna. Today's guest is Kieth Carne. Kieth Carne has a brand new record out called Magenta Light. He is also the drummer of We Are Scientists. And on the podcast, we talk about that, his 13 years with the band. We talk about him being a drum teacher. We talk about movies, his cat, and so much more. So tune in. Hi, Kieth. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. So you are in Sweden, is that correct?
I'm in Stockholm right now. I've been here since yesterday. I'm on tour right now with We Are Scientists, and we have about 5 days left of this European run.
So I'm sure this is not your first time being in Europe because you've been with the band for 13 years. So is it different now with the climate of the world? Is it different now being on tour?
Do you mean the literal climate of the world because everything is getting warmer, or do you mean the sort of
that
Trump
could go
effect?
that could go either way. So you can
Things
answer
are
how
a
you
little.
feel.
I'll tell you, personally, things are a little bit different for me right now because, in a sort of big brotherly way, We Are Scientists has shown me so much of Europe, and I've seen so much of the UK and Europe through playing with them for so many years that I feel very comfortable to explore on my own. So in that way, in that climate, it's a little different. In the physical climate of the world, I guess I haven't felt an appreciable climate difference in the last 13 years, but I'm sure if we get into decimal points, we could probably see it going that way. And with Trump, it's interesting because I think that there's this like implicit idea that as a rock band, kind of traveling in Europe, that people tend to give us the benefit of the doubt that we're on the left, like on progressive side, and especially for a band like us, that is a very safe assumption to make. We chat about people with it. People are curious. They ask us what things are like in America, but also, being a band from New York, it's hard for us to say sometimes because New York is a little bit of a bubble, though we certainly get to see a little bit more of the country than most of our New Yorker compatriots because we travel in a van so much around the country. So it was really interesting. In 2023, we went on tour. It was a year before the election. And I came home and I said to my wife, honey, get ready. He is going to win. It was very obvious with the groundswell. And so here we're like a little bit defenders of it. But, I also try to stick up for people. I think that a lot of people have been hoodwinked into voting for him. I think a lot of people are just trying to put food on the table and they're trying to look for shelter for their families. And they've just been misguided by a Republican Party that is taking the mantle and making them feel that they're going to do that for them. So I try to also defend Americans in that way too.
I often thought when the first time he ran, I'm like, when I would hear people saying that they were going to vote for him, I'm like, you think a man with a golden toilet understands you? How is that possible? And
Yeah.
it's very interesting because I moved the day I was in the process of moving the day of the
Mm.
election, and we delayed it a day because after the election, I was just kind of devastated. It was like a nightmare. I woke up in the middle of the night, just like the first time. And it was just like, oh no, here we are. And I remember asking one of the movers that day, I'm like, so did you vote? No, why bother? Why bother voting? It's not going to make any
Mm.
difference in my life. And I'm just like, oh, so you're part of the problem. And I mean,
Yeah.
I know we've all had those moments where it's like my vote doesn't matter, but it does. And
Yeah.
that's kind of how we need to look at things. And to your point about New York being a bubble, I grew up in New Orleans until I was
Hmm.
16, and then we moved to Shreveport. And New Orleans is a bubble all to itself in Louisiana. I mean, things have
Hmm.
gotten a little bit further out now, but back then Mardi Gras was only celebrated in New Orleans. Mardi Gras was not
Hmm.
anywhere else. And it was very conservative up in Shreveport. So everybody looked at me and said, "Oh, you must be a party girl. You came from New Orleans." It's like, no, but okay.
Mm.
So there's that assumption, just like New York, that New York, and even I would say this in a world representation, and that we do this a lot because I'm outside of Chicago, way outside of Chicago now. Chicago is the bubble. Everybody looks at Illinois, we think of Chicago. Everybody looks at New York, we think of
Hmm.
New York City. We don't think of everything else.
Right. Right.
And it kind of goes with when you look at politics, we have the fearless leader. And everybody else, I wrote a piece recently about this because the fact of we have leaders in power that really don't represent the people. They have their
Yeah.
own agendas. And really, I think if you ask most of the world if they really wanted to be in this war, I would say most people would say, or excuse me, training exercises or excursion, because we can't say the word war. Um,
Right.
I think most people would say they didn't want this.
Hmm. Yeah. And even the right is coming around on that. Not even coming around. They feel misrepresented, and this is not an America sort of first policy.
No, no, and we didn't come
Yeah.
here to talk about this. I didn't mean to go make this so political, but I appreciate your input and I appreciate your voice on this because it's something sometimes that I feel that as a podcaster, I can get in trouble. And there was never a time in my life that I would think, oh, well, what I say is going to get me in trouble. But now it's like,
Hmm.
well, it can get you flagged.
Yeah, it can. It's relevant as well. I think it's important to always try to be looking outside of your island or your bubble. I mean, that's a little bit what got us into this mess to begin with. So I see it as a place of responsibility for us to be sort of stewards of goodwill and sort of rationality when we come over here and we speak to Europeans. And I hope that we impart a sense of sanity. Because if you're going based on headlines, it doesn't feel like America's a very sane place right now.
No, no. And it kind of, I want to go back to something that I read in your press bio because you talked, we talk about how crazy the world is now and how it feels so, especially in the States, it feels very uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty here and a lot of things that we saw progress in because you talk about being a kid in the 90s and how as a boy you were scared to reach for the color pink. And
Uh-huh.
I bring this up because you think about before all this started and how the LGBTQ community had so many rights expanded upon. They were
Yeah.
being accepted and now they're trying to pass a bill to criminalize being LGBTQ.
Hmm.
I mean, how did we get here and how did these things become so unacceptable? And why are they so unacceptable? Because even as you as a kid, you were scared to pick out a freaking crayon.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think a lot of that also comes from the fact that I was an only child. I mean, I had plenty of friends, and
Mhm.
I did not live any sort of like abused childhood, or like bullied. I mean, every kid is bullied, but I grew up in a wonderfully supportive and nurturing environment through my parents. But I had long hair. I'm an only child. I was really, really, really intensely into music and like art and kids would call me gay all the time, so I think I was just particularly sensitive about it. And there was a thing about in 90s kid culture, whether it was beets and liver are gross, or like boys wear blue and girls wear pink. There were these sort of echo chambers reinforcing this age-old thought that ironically was kind of dying out with my generation. And yeah, I said that in the press bio, and I almost like regret it. In saying that, like, thank gosh things are different now, because I don't want to suggest that we've moved beyond prejudices that keep people oppressed. We have so much work to do in that regard, but at least superficially, I don't think it's ridiculous for people to be thought of as like emasculine if they're wearing pink. And as a sort of subset of that, I don't think that if you're a man and if you're thought of being as a little bit feminine, that that's a bad thing anymore.
No, it's not. And the one thing that is really being perpetrated a lot nowadays is division. And it's
Mm,
not it now. I mean, I've seen this just keep mushrooming and mushrooming. It was the races, it was age, and now it's. I mean, we've had gender inequality for a long time, but now with the manosphere, and we are really dividing people between women and men
hmm.
in a totally different level.
Yeah.
And I think when you really think about that, if you look at the bigger picture, you have to ask who is behind all of the division. I mean, division started way back in the potato famine, back in the days of Ireland when we wanted to divide people. So if you separate people, they're not as strong. So now but yet in the same token, we're sitting there rallying, and this is a lot of BS that they normally do. We're rallying that we need the family, we need the strong family, we need kids, and
Yeah.
okay, and we're pro-life, okay, but we don't want to support you, we don't want to help you, we don't want to give you anything, and so
Yeah.
all these things are very contradictory. And you even have politicians who will vote against LGBTQ when you know that most likely they are closeted. And that's unfortunate that
Mm.
they've lived their life that way.
Yeah. Log cabin Republicans, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. It's interesting. When I was in high school, I was a senior in high school, gay marriage was coming up and marriage equality was sort of coming up. And it's something that I had the luxury to never really think about or worry about as a straight white male.
Mm-hmm.
Not that race has anything to do right now with, marriage equality. Right now, I say after like loving,
Yeah.
loving this decision. But it sort of blew my mind. And it was something that I had never thought about, that gay marriages like were not gay couples were not allowed to marry. And it's almost like I remember being at dinner and asking my parents about it, and they're big supporters of LGBTQ rights, they're advocates. And I was outraged about it, and almost like outraged that they were not outraged about it. They said, yeah, it's unfair. It's just kind of the way that the system works. And, there are other sort of like legal definitions like civil unions. I was like, yeah, but this just seems crazy. And I think that sort of generationally that was happening. People used to say that too, that like millennials, the big contributions to politics that we made were marriage equality, and that was not really a thing that was considered taboo unless you were a part of like evangelical, right? And legalization of marijuana. And that these were things that were going to become passe in the Republican Party, and insanely they haven't. But I think everybody smokes weed, and sexuality is a spectrum. So, hopefully we can move past it soon.
True. Well, and here's the problem. We have somebody on the Supreme Court who benefited from loving, but
Hmm.
who would like to wipe out loving.
With Clarence Thomas. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
And
true.
it's
Yeah.
like, how? And when you think about, you're talking about how these things come about. Jerry Falwell put all the stuff, the Heritage Foundation started all these wheels back in the 70s, all
Mm.
because he wanted to be able to control more. They wanted more power. And that's why we have the
Yeah.
right evangelical that we do now.
Hmm.
Because my generation, which is the Gen X, never would have thought that Roe v. Wade would have been turned over.
Yeah. It's wild.
So, but speaking of legalizing pot, so your wife had a psychedelic vision that inspired your record, Magenta Light. Was this a trip from that? I mean, maybe that's too much of a question, but I can tell you his whole story about my husband trying new marijuana. That was pretty
Mhm.
wild and sent him on a pet way. But so was it
Yeah.
inspired by a ride like that?
It was a psychedelic vision. We try to take psychedelics responsibly. Like,
Hmm.
we're very careful about how we use them and what we're taking, and realize that that's not for everyone, and
Hmm.
advocate for it responsibly. But we try to do it as a sort of bonding exercise a few times a year. And yeah, she had this intense vision of magenta light pouring out of my face. And it's very
Wow.
funny because I'd never really communicated to her how much that color had meant to me. And it felt like it was this something that was sort of like dying to express itself from within me. And she shared this vision with me, and it really moved me, and it really struck me. And I really started recording ideas for what became this album the very next day.
Cool. Very cool. My late husband, he was used to smoking, as he would call it, Indiana ditchweed. So he had smoked most of his life, even in the early 2000s, and he quit cold turkey, and marijuana became legal, and he needed it for medical use. So he took a couple of hits, and I'm like, I'm going to go upstairs and write. He's like, no, you can't. I'm like, why? He goes, you have to sit here and hold me down. I'm like,
Mm,
excuse me? He's like, everything is like pixelating and moving, and I don't know how to stop it. I'm like, okay.
yeah.
So I sat there and just held his knees down because he felt like he was moving.
Yeah, it's very real. I think marijuana has become a little too intense for me, and I'm starting to sound like a boomer or a Gen Xer right now. But I go into dispensaries now asking them for lower strength marijuana. I feel like it's too debilitating, and I'm sort of showing my age here with that. But my friends and I often want that sort of like 70s kind of mid weed a lot,
Hmm.
where you smoke it as an enhancement, and then it allows you to still keep your facilities. But yeah, it's you have to be really. This is why I sort of say, my wife Haley and I are advocates for responsible use of psychedelics. It was mushrooms, by the way, that we had been taking, that day in particular. And I'm sorry to hear about your husband, but it's amazing that you have these colorful memories and stories to reflect on.
Oh, the best is when I wake up from a dead sleep and I hear him saying, set phasers to purr. Because he's dreaming. So, yeah, I mean, he's been gone 6 years, but it's one of those things where it's like you have those memories, and I'm sure you have those with your wife, and vice versa.
Mhm.
And that's the thing about coupledom that we don't really talk about is there are those little pieces that are unique to our relationships that
Yeah,
can still make
yeah,
us laugh. So,
it's true. And I do have her to thank for the. She is the prime engine behind the inspiration for this album, both her art and like her paintings and her support for my working on it.
and I wanted to ask, you made a statement called termite art practices. What exactly is that?
Termite art practices. That's a phrase coined by, I believe, Manny Farber, the film critic, and film cinema academic, and it was basically a way to combat against sort of important, like costumey cinema that tends to win Academy Awards. I think the line has really been kind of blurred between that kind of art, like sort of the contrary type of art is white elephant art, and it's basically like what causes more damage, a stampeding white elephant or termites. And termites get in the foundation, they gnaw away at the wood, at the very support structure, and then before you know it, the house collapses. Versus this stampeding elephant, it makes a lot of noise, and sure, it's of course a danger, but it's really the sort of like invasive thing that takes longer for its impact to be felt. And I try to remember this. I mean, and to some degree too. This is more a part of the sort of critical discourse than it is for like an art practitioner. But I think it's important to remember these things, and it's a thing that sort of gives me hope as a cinephile and as a lover of certain kinds of music that aren't necessarily written about in laudatory ways. But it's like how Jim Carrey can have, or Adam Sandler can have a huge impact on cinema and filmmakers over the course of the 90s, where his movies are sort of written off compared to something like Shakespeare in Love or The King's Speech. Those are fine movies, don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
and I don't want to sound judgmental about other people's enjoyment of them, but I think that you can see great legs in movements that are discounted by critical establishment, in art. I mean, most of the great stuff people don't appreciate when it's released anyway. Let's make it clear. I'm not trying to say that about my
No, I know,
stuff.
I know.
I really appreciate DIY art practices and come from sort of like punk basement scene music, and I think that that place has as much critical and cultural value as things that are nominated for Grammys.
One thing that you also made me think about when you were talking about the termite situation is that's kind of the situation with AI now, with generative
Mm,
AI. Let me clarify, not all AI, but generative AI, because, now there's stories coming up where artists have had their voice stolen, have had their lyrics stolen and re-recorded and put out, and somebody's turned around and tried to copyright this. Even Ariana Grande apparently has been subject to this. I
oh
saw an
wow.
article today. So it's like, as a musician, there's this parasitic thing that's now there that slowly is creeping into the creative world. And maybe
Yeah.
not so slow, but it kind of started out slow. And now we're to a point where it's trying to devour creativity.
Yeah.
And how do you combat that? And how do you feel about that? I mean, I know environmentally, AI data centers are bad, but data centers in general are bad. So,
Yeah.
and there is a pushback also because eventually, once all this AI stuff comes out, social media is going to be a graveyard. We're not going to need it
Mm,
because how am I going to know that this conversation that we're having is very real? But somebody could take my image and your image and create a whole different conversation.
yeah.
And
That is interesting.
so, how do you, as an artist, feel that this could be a detriment for, or do you think it would be a great tool to have something collaborate with you?
I'm not a Luddite, but I am pretty scared of AI and the way that it's invaded creative working spaces. And I feel very torn about it because I should probably utilize it more than I do. I am worried about its, the outsized environmental impact that it makes. For example, a search on Claude or whatever or ChatGPT takes what 5 to 10 times the amount of energy that a Google search does. I think that that's important, but at the same time, I don't want to cripple myself, and be unfamiliar with tools that you have to use to be a sort of competent producer or songwriter or engineer or whatever. I don't want to sound like a person who is unfamiliar with using the internet, like the way that those people sound now. So I struggle with it as a just like a session drummer. It's already starting to impact my work because if you're a songwriter that wants to put demos out or just put some songs out and you sort of slap some AI generated drums on it and you think they sound pretty good, that puts me out of a job. That's of course not the songwriter's concern, but it is my concern. And yeah, I'm not really sure. That said, if you sort of like back up a little bit, AI technology seems to have a sort of different flavor because it's invalidating a lot of human creativity and human labor. But I also wonder if digital music and digitization of the music recording process wasn't thought of I wonder if it was thought of in a similar way. I was only able to make this record, for example, because I didn't have to have a gigantic reel to reel tape machine to do it. I'm able to make half of my living as a studio recording drummer because microphones are inexpensive enough and preamps are inexpensive enough. And my laptop here is basically all I need to sort of drive those tools. And I'm able to compete with maybe not like top studios because those are insane rooms with insane mic lockers, but I'm able to give people a sort of like mid-point, mid-budget equivalent. And I don't think very many people will hear much of a difference, in the way that they're consuming music. So I'm conflicted about the whole thing. It's a long way of saying that, but I tend to not use AI very much, and I tend to, you know, worry about it a bit.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you make a fair point. It's like when the music went to digital, it opened doors for people that they had the ability to record. I mean,
Hmm.
we all know Wild Thing was recorded in Tone Loc's closet. So that was a very small little piece. That wasn't really AI, it wasn't computer at that time. But as we've evolved, it's opened the door for more artists to be able to record. The problem becomes when people are going, hey, I want a song about this. Can you give me a song about
Hmm.
that? That's the
Right.
problem. It's the same
Right.
thing with authors. I mean, I wrote a piece because I was working with an author who wanted me to edit her book, and there were red flags. And she's like, the biggest red flag was, here's my book, do what you want with it. Because just like your song, just or your album, just like a book to me, that's my baby. I'm not going to
Yeah.
hand that over and let you just do whatever. And she had
Yeah.
left prompts in there. And so
Mm.
you're asking somebody to go in and fix this for your benefit, but you're not doing the work. And then you're going to turn around and say, I'm an author, I'm a musician, but are you really?
Right.
And
Yeah.
if you're doing it for a cash grab, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. It's very true. I'm writing a drum book right
I
now,
was going to ask you
and
about that.
oh, really?
Yes, that was on my list.
So cool. I'm writing a drum book right now, and I am not a visually inclined person. I'm not a designer, and I probably would have had a much easier time using Canva's AI sort of like editors, editing like
Hmm.
visual systems. And who knows, maybe I will wind up using it and dabbling a little bit because it will be a time saver. But I think, again, thinking about it as a tool as opposed to thinking about it as the practice is the big difference, you know.
Well, you can also, with Canva, you can always buy stock photos to
Yeah.
represent your stuff. I mean, that's the thing. And even with stock photos, like Deposit Photo, you have an option to turn off AI.
Hmm.
And that's where you can look at true pictures. But that also is you're trusting the people that are uploading those photos that that they're being honest.
Right, right. Yeah.
So, what made you decide to write a drum book? I know you're a teacher on the side. You're a drum teacher on the side.
Yeah,
So,
just years and years and years of teaching, and I used to write, hand write very similar music notation for different students. And so rather than taking valuable one-on-one lesson time, whether it's through virtual sessions or whether it's in person, I just said, a lot of this stuff tends to be very similar. I'm prescribing very similar grooves or lesson plans to elicit, certain facilities and to sort of like work on different things for students. I said, I'm gonna sort of codify this information. And the other reason is because I have a lot of I call these things trail markers. I'm really, really big into hiking and outdoors. I love that stuff. And I have these things that I call trail markers to steer students onto the course, like a trailblaze on a tree. And they're little helpful things that I want people to keep in the back of their minds when they're working on any task. For example, the key to speed is accuracy. The key to accuracy is relaxation. I want students to remember this as they're practicing. Something like playing it slow will let and it's just like a matter of not just knowing that you have to play something slow, but taking the time to kind of remember that maxim to ask yourself, is this slow enough? And those are just a few examples. And I wanted to have the sort of like technical exercises and that sort of like supportive pat on the back that I like to provide for my students. I wanted that sort of codified in the same way so that I could give it to people when I'm not physically in their presence.
and you also wrote articles for Drummer Magazine, correct?
I wrote about 20 articles for Modern Drummer from 2016 to 2020. I had the pleasure of working with that magazine. I had the pleasure of growing up reading that magazine. So yeah, that was a very cool experience.
Which kind of leads me into, so what made you decide to be a drummer? I mean, I always wanted to be a drummer, but my mom's, that never happened. I got a bass guitar. I snuck a bass
Yeah.
guitar. She didn't know I bought one, but I said it was my friend's. But anyway,
That's okay. That's very Lane Kim of you from Gilmore Girls. I like that. You should try drums. Drums are great. Um, I never decided to play drums. It's almost kind of like having an adopted, animal or a rescue animal. It's like they choose you. My dad is a musician, and my mom has great musical taste. And so they were always playing music around the house when I was a kid. It's the same age-old sort of like musician story. And I had a musical epiphany one day leaving the cinema with my dad. They'd gotten me a drum kit when I was 3 years old because I was totally obsessed with it. And I banged around on it and whatever, like didn't try to organize my thinking at all. But then when I was about 6 or 7, I was leaving the cinema and I just had this realization that I could play like within structure, and asked my dad if we could pull that old like mini drum kit out when I got home. And he said, yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. Like, let's check it out. And I learned my first grooves that day. And I haven't turned back ever since. I've been totally obsessed with it ever since.
Cool. The closest I got to playing drums, I think, was I dug all the pots out of the cabinet when my mom was making peanut butter fudge and just was
Yeah.
down, and she was not happy, but
Oh,
you know,
well, hopefully you didn't damage them. But
no.
hey, look, I'm a full advocate of that. There was a really famous jazz club in New York City called Bradley's that for some reason did not allow drum set. I think because of a noise ordinance issue.
Okay.
And every once in a while, there'd be drummers who'd come down to that gig. This is before my time, but they would like take pots and pans out of the kitchen, and drummers would like play a little time on it. It was very hush hush.
Nice. Well, why didn't they just use, brushes? That would have
Yeah, they
slowed
could
it
do
down.
that. I don't know.
I don't know. So you have been with We Are Scientists for 13 years. You've been on 7 of their records, but you also have recorded numerous other stuff as a session player. So
Yeah,
would you say that drumming has been your life? I mean, you went to um, Rutgers for music, correct?
that's correct. Yeah, music and journalism, the two highest paying professions in the world right now.
So your writing kind of fits that
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
So what made you decide that I'm going to, because the way you talked about it is you had your strict jazz proficiency during the
Mhm.
week, and then on the weekends you went out exploring in a van and exploring the music scene and playing. So what ultimately called to you? I mean, you could have stayed the true path of being a jazz musician, but you kind of, what led you on your new path?
I always identified as a sort of rock musician. Going to school for jazz music. I mean, I'm intensely interested in jazz music. I go hear jazz music all the time. I live in New York City, and we have such an amazing history of it and an amazing relationship with it in its current form. There's just more work to be had in the rock milieu, and it's just sort of where I found work. And it was a language that I understood, that I seemed to speak pretty well. And I think that my specialty is as a rock drummer influenced heavily by jazz, as opposed to the other way around. Really, just because I don't get enough opportunities to play it. I put a lot of improvisational elements into my playing with We Are Scientists, and I play with a lot of ensembles in New York that heavily rely on improvisation. Um, I'm playing a show in support of my album on May 2nd at a great club called Union Pool. And at that show, we will play a number of the pieces from my album, from Magenta Light, and we'll expand them with a lot of improvisation. And so that sort of like spirit of jazz music and improvisation pervades all of the music that I currently work on. I don't see it as like choosing necessarily. I just see everything as some degree of influence. I had an absolutely like soul jarring experience right before I left for this tour, where my wife and I went to go see Tristan and Isolde by Richard by Wagner. This amazing 5 hour yearning opera, and that was incredibly impactful on me as a musician. And I think about that a lot. I don't necessarily know how opera will play into the future of my like recordings, but it's in there somewhere.
Well, and if it inspired you, I mean that's an important thing. Which this is gonna seem off maybe, but you're a cinephile. And we were talking about jazz, and we're talking about music.
Mm.
The movie Sinners.
Uh-huh.
What did you think about that?
I really, really, really loved Sinners. Um, there were things about it that, you know, I haven't seen it. I should say I haven't seen it since I saw it in June. And I've only seen it the one time, and I was really moved by it. I thought the way that the film tackles a shared cultural history in both Black Americans, sort of like shared cultural history in segregation and their sort of shared cultural experience with, slavery, and the shared cultural history that they have through music and field song was amazingly rendered in the way that they sort of put it on a parallel track with Irish folk song. The Irish, also very like a segregated group who was sort of like racially cast aside. And the way that sort of like art finds a way in these communities, I thought was really brilliant. And then the way that they tied that together with like vampire lore, and they made it all this one like kind of cosmic cocktail, was very moving and very cool. I will say I did find that one segment where they had the Parliament Funkadelic guitarist and the DJ with turntables. I found it a little cheesy. I'll be honest with you.
Well, yeah, that was a little bit.
I could see what they were doing. I don't mean to cut you off. I just don't want to lose this train of thought. I could see where they were going and what they were doing. And I also think that Ryan Coogler, the strongest part of a lot of his films are the astral travel sequences. In Black Panther, T'Challa goes through this amazing sort of like ancestor ritual where he finds the power to become Black Panther, right? And Ryan Coogler is an amazing director at that, and I could totally see that. But it felt a little bit to me like Hollywood's version of a music lesson. Yeah. But I mean, whatever. It was a big Hollywood movie, so that's okay.
I did like the ending too. I like, and I don't want to give too much away, but I like the ending that you saw the longevity there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah. And that he was true to I don't want to say the devil, because that's what his father said that guitar was, but yeah, he was true to his passion.
Yeah, and we got more from the great Buddy Guy. It was so cool.
So I mean, I think it was a powerful movie, and I just saw it, I guess, about 2 months ago. But when you look at the bigger picture, you were talking about the Irish. There we go again with the potato famine, because that's what was the dividing line. And I don't understand. I'll say this real quick. I don't understand how we can't just all get along. We are all the same. We are all human.
Yeah.
And we are scientists, but we are all human, and we all love, and somebody's benefiting from our hate. And that's what's scary.
Yeah. That's true.
So when you look at because you do have a video for Look for the Moon, that's your single. What made that stand out of all the songs that are on the record? What was that? Why did you choose that one to make it your single?
Well, so I actually just had a music video come out yesterday that is for a song called Totally Liminal. And I don't mean to undercut your question, but that is actually the song that I put a sort of like big production, and I'm also not correcting you. It sort of goes into the answer of Look for the Moon. I made this really, really cool music video with one of my best friends in the world for this song, Totally Liminal. It's now streaming through the music website Under the Radar. And then I'm going to make it public on YouTube on Monday or Tuesday. But that was the song that sort of most embodied the aesthetic of the record, brought together this sort of like dance and sort of like transcendent indie rock sort of like practices. and that was the one that felt the most sort of like danceable and catchy, and the most sort of palpable distillation of the record. But the entire record, I will, all that stuff to say, like, go listen to Totally Liminal, go check out the website, or pardon me, go check out the music video directed by Al Markman. It looks amazing. I play a theosophical preacher, and there's like a little bit of a twist ending, very heavily inspired by Robert Altman films, and kind of like conspiracy minded, like unsolved mysteries and stuff like that. Um, all that stuff aside, Look for the Moon is the song that kicked off my record. It's the first song I wrote. It was the sort of first song wherein I proved to myself that I was able to distill these sort of like disparate visions in my head, with like inspiration coming from lots of different places into a thing that actually felt coherent and catchy. It was essentially the song that allowed me to articulate the full aesthetic. And there were very easy visual there was a very easy visual language to tap into. Most of the footage is stuff that I've filmed either on tour or on vacations with my wife, and I think a lot about my wife while I'm on tour. We have a very, very, very deep connection and sort of shared support system for one another. I encourage her art making practices, and she reciprocates many times over for me as well. And so it was really easy for me to sort of tap into a visual language for it and sort of create almost like a memory diary for these times that I think about her while I'm on tour or traveling. And yeah, and I thought that would be a moving way to sort of kick off the album.
It is. It is. It's a nice song, and having your partner be supportive of your creative vision is very much a gift. And I had one that way, and
Yeah.
he was somebody that, because my first book is about a drugged out rock star, a bass player who, it's been out since 2019. He actually ODs and he lives his whole life in a coma.
Oh, wow.
And then he wakes up and realizes none of that was real. So my husband was on dialysis and I would go write and I'd pick him up. He's like, "So what happened with Nigel today?" And I would tell him, he's like, "I'm living vicariously through this man." So, but I
Mm,
mean, he wasn't always the nicest guy, meaning Nigel, but it was something that my husband was supportive of because he also was legally blind. So I'd have to read it to him.
okay.
And so he was there. And that's the thing. If you have that support system, whether it be your parents or your spouse, it helps a lot as a creative because it makes you feel like I don't want to say I can do anything, but I can do this. I can make it happen.
Yeah. Especially as a novelist or as a writer, it is alone with your thoughts, and there's no committee to sort of check in with. I mean, that's the thing about a band is that you have somebody who's standing by saying to you like, "Oh, come on, that's corny," or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And I can identify with that. It's like the buck stops here. The buck stops with you. You're in charge of making these decisions. So, you have to have somebody to bounce that off of. That's really beautiful that you had that with your husband.
Well,
And it sounds like you found a channel for the traumatic experience of seeing him go through something that was physically difficult, but maybe he was mentally unbound by.
it was. I mean, for him to live vicariously, it was like Nigel was messing around with a bunch of broads, and hate to say broads because it's really tacky, but the book was set in the 80s, or 90s,
Uh,
so it was kind of one of those not so nice things. I should just say groupies because Nigel was with a bunch of groupies. But
mm,
anyway, it was one of those things that my husband would never have lived that life. My
mhm,
husband always longed to be able to kind of do what you're doing. As far as traveling, because he always like, once my parents die, we're going to move out of Illinois. Okay. He never left Illinois.
mhm,
And I had this life before him I moved from New Orleans to Shreveport to Dallas to Indy. I mean, I moved around. I followed bands. I hung out with bands. So I had this life. I produced a television
mhm.
show. I was a disc jockey, and he had his normal job, and he was the good boy. one of
Hmm.
five, but and the baby of the family, but he had a life that was parameters.
Mm,
So, yeah, but I needed the stability. So it worked out, you know? I mean, that's the thing. Sometimes
yeah,
when we have people that are opposite of us, even though they're very much like us, they give us that support.
it's important. I mean, it prevents redundancy for sure.
Yes, yes. So, what do you hope to accomplish with this record? I mean, you're on tour with We Are Scientists. So, what's coming up in the future? Yes, you have that one date. What do you see long term? Are you going to do more dates to support this? Or are you going back in the studio with We Are Scientists? Are you going back out on the road with them? What's going on?
I'm always going back in the on the studio and on the road with scientists. I'll continue teaching. I'll continue, working as a session musician if people are good enough to have me on their albums. I still value and love that work. This is, I don't really know, and it's funny because I'm understandably asked this question a lot. People are asking about what the sort of vision is, and really, it this record is just an articulation of a kind of like inner voice and a mood and a feeling. And I've had so many ideas and thoughts, and I've been there to support so many other artists' vision, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. But I really just kind of wanted to have my own contribution sort of like out in the world. You can think of it, a cynic would call it like a contextual business card, where you're like, this is how I musically see the world, right? But I just like to think of it as a sort of personal aesthetic ethos. And it sounds high-minded. I don't mean to
No,
make it sound
no.
that way. But it was something that was inside of me, and I always knew that it was there. This sort of like gushing, bittersweet music that is both very melancholic, but also like bright and melodic. Like I love music that makes you want to cry but makes you want to smile at the same time. Just love beautiful music, and I really just wanted to make something like that articulated that. And that's really just all it came down to. I'm incredibly grateful to have this show coming up where I'm putting together a like dream band of some of my closest friends, and a band that I would never be able to put on a tour because I couldn't afford them and I couldn't get everybody's schedule aligned. So I'm really just kind of focusing on the immediate there. And the show is on my 40th birthday actually as well.
Nice.
So I this is almost kind of like a 40th birthday gift to myself. Is I beat myself up a lot about not being productive enough and about not doing enough work. And this is like literally the other than working toward a charitable aim, like giving money or my time to a charitable cause. This is truly the best way I could imagine spending time is by doing this. And so I decided to do it for my 40th birthday.
It's a nice gift for yourself. It really is. When you were
Yeah.
talking about, creating something, there's one band, and I'm sure other bands have done it. Back in the 80s, in excess, I'm sure you've
Oh
heard.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
was
people,
just talking about NXS the other day.
yeah. They used to put out B-sides. They would have the singles or whatever, and on the B-side, a band member would always do their own personal track
Mm,
that sounded nothing like what normally would be on the record, but it gave
yeah.
each band member something tangible to put out, to create their
Yeah.
own music, to create their own vibe. And I think at that
Yeah.
time that made the band stronger and it made the fans more
Yeah.
curious.
It's really cool that that they have a sort of had a liquid enough idea of what in excess could be, that they could support so many like different aesthetic opinions. I'm a little bit hesitant with that kind of stuff. With We Are Scientists, for example, I think my music is quite different from We Are
Mhm.
Scientists, and that's okay. Keith Murray, our singer, is one of the most amazing songwriters I've ever worked with, and he is just like so hardworking, and he has just such a gift for the song craft. And he sees music in a slightly different way than I do. We come together, and it's amazing. I love his music, and I love working on it and working with him, and playing music with him is one of the most fun things in the world. But I kind of wanted to not have to worry about the baggage of creating music for We Are Scientists. That's why I don't bring them songs, and I contribute to his songs in other ways, when we're sort of like creating the record. And so it gives me a lot of appreciation for what In Excess does, or for a band like the Eagles that brings together like all these different songwriters and they're putting them together. But part of this was also designed to be a slightly a selfish thing,
Oh yeah.
and it feels good to be the person in charge of it. Not like I'm ego tripping.
No,
I'm
no, I
just saying,
understand. I understand. I understand. And here's the
yeah,
thing: what NXS did then, you can't do now because we don't
yeah,
release singles. We release
right,
singles, but we don't have B-sides. So
right,
you couldn't do it now. But back then,
yeah,
it was like you had a little bit more fluidity. And yeah, when you can bring, like you said, the Eagles, all these songwriters together, but each band has their own, I don't want to say hierarchy, but
yeah.
their own ability to be that family, because it's like a family and a marriage all combined in one. You have the stresses, you have the personalities, you have your roles to play.
hmm
And
And the bands that succeed know how to do those roles.
exactly. And
Yeah,
especially with being in a band for 13 years, yeah, that says you've had the longevity, you've worked through things, you know the routine. And that's an important thing, because a lot of bands, just like podcasters, will get somewhere and they'll say, you know what, I'm tired of this. We
yeah,
should be here. And no, dude, your ego roll, just because we signed doesn't mean, and of course, signing now means something totally different than it did in the 80s and 90s.
of
So,
course.
you know, we have to look at the world in a different view, but some things, being in a band, still has that family dynamic, still
Yeah.
has those interactions, personal interactions. So for you, how different is it when you're in We Are Scientists and you have this groove to suddenly go into a different project and just be that player?
Um, it's funny. It feels very different, but it's partially because it sounds so different. The music that I'm making is much more heavily influenced by avant-garde and experimental and instrumental music. So it does feel very different. The sort of like points of reference are coming from much different places, but. We Are Scientists has to worry about entertaining more people because people are buying tickets for their shows around the world. And I don't necessarily mean to make it a market driven thing, but the part of the aesthetic of We Are Scientists is giving people the space to dance in a room, and to this sort of like angular rock music, and that informs a lot of the ways, I should say, that informs a lot of the choices that they make in terms of selecting certain songs. Kieth is a prolific songwriter, and I think for our last record, he and Chris, well, Kieth wrote something like 112 songs, and then we took, 10 or 12 of them, or however many are on the record or whatever, right? And so the part of that selection process is, okay, what 10 songs best fit the space that We Are Scientists are in for this, for 2025 or 2026. I didn't have that baggage to worry about, that this was just could be a complete and full on expression. And I had the ability to make it a little bit physical. One of the things I love reading about and listening to is when people talk about their creative processes, and especially in New York City, artists will have to use their studio apartment as their practice space. And so people have really novel ideas about what they do. Some people leave their physical apartment and take a walk around the block. I've heard some people take the subway somewhere because it's about moving through physical space from one place to the next. I was recording a lot of this in the same studio where I was teaching and doing drum tracks for other people. So anytime that I was recording a note of music for this record, I turned on a magenta light that my wife gave me. She gave me an LED lamp that I could change the colors for. And anytime I was recording any note, I made sure that that magenta light was on, and that was my, my positive dog whistle to myself that, okay, this is your space to create this world. You're inside that Crayola color right now, and so make the choices that feel appropriate for that, and then when a student would come in, a light would go to green or a light would go to whatever, and
Which makes sense. Who were some of your drumming idols? Who inspired you?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I live and breathe. Elvin Jones is playing John Coltrane's drummer. He is probably my all-time favorite drummer, but I'm obsessed with Dave King, the drummer from the Bad Plus, Brian Blade, the drummer from Brian Blade Fellowship, and who's worked with Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan. I grew up listening to Carter Beauford, the drummer from the Dave Matthews Band, Eric Kretz from Stone Temple Pilots, Dave Grohl, Danielle Haim, the drummer from Haim. She doesn't play with them live, but I just absolutely love her playing on recordings. Sarah Jones, who plays with Harry Styles. I love her playing. I could go on all day. Jeff Widner, who's one of my best friends in the world, just inspires me every day. He's like a local New York drummer. Che Chen, or that's a guitarist. The drummer from $75 Bill in New York band. I could go on and on and on. Mark Juliana, amazing drummer. It's boundless. I try to find value in all drumming, whether it's disciplined academic drumming or whether it's intuitive drumming, like sort of like punk. Oh God, how could I not mention William Goldsmith, who's become a close personal friend of mine, the drummer from Sunny Day Real Estate. He is one of my idols, and I have the pleasure of being able to text and call him to seek his ideas for things. And, there's a really important band for me named Penfold, and their drummer was big. The singer of Penfold is actually going to be playing at my show on May 2nd as well. So feels full circle. I just always try to remain wide-eyed and inspired by drummers who are my peers or my superiors who are younger than me. Doesn't matter.
It's all good. So I'm going to ask something that's off topic but you're a movie buff. So, and it's not the directors that I know you favor, but The Matrix. The first time you watched The Matrix, the original Matrix, not the other ones, the first one, did it kind of mess with your head?
It totally messed with my head. I saw The Matrix with one of my best friends in the world, Scott Wozniak, at the Amboy Multiplex Cinemas in 1999 when it came out. And by the way, Scott Wozniak, huge inspiration. He's a great drummer, one of my best friends. We grew up together. He's one of my favorite drummers. Of course it messed with my head. It was confusing in the most inspiring way,
It had me after I watched it at a friend's house. I was like, so is everything real? It gives you that questionable thing of I wanted to taste steak again. It's still one of the most prolific lines in that movie because are we experiencing reality or is it all a simulation?
Simulation, simulacrum. Yeah.
So you have a cat. named Mona. Did you adopt Mona?
I did. I found Mona on tour
Oh,
while I was
nice.
on tour. I was in Detroit, well, Ferndale, Michigan, just outside of Detroit with We Are Scientists. And we pulled up into our into our hotel early, which was really strange. We never get to the hotel before sound check. Never. We check in after the show. And this was this like, we've checked into a hotel before a show like maybe 20 times in the 13 years that I've been with them. And this happened to be one of them. And the band went into the reception office. I was changing out of my Birkenstocks and I heard meowing coming from the bushes where we had parked next to. And I stuck my head in the bushes and I saw this adorable little thing flopping around. And she came right out and greeted me. And we couldn't find a shelter for her. So we brought her to the show. Thought she would get adopted by somebody from the venue. She didn't. And the crazy thing is, I left her behind because, again, we thought she was going to get adopted. And so I left her at the venue in somebody's care. And we went on to Chicago and we had plans to go back to literally that same hotel, that same city. And so when I found out the next day she hadn't been adopted, I said, well, that's it. I'm adopting her.
Yeah.
And so we went back and we scooped her up and she came on tour with us. She came into Canada with us. It was the most stressful 3 days of tour I've ever been on because we had to have this cat in our lap and I had to make sure that she didn't get herself into trouble at these venues. But she was such a good girl and God, I miss her right now.
I just adopted a cat this week. That's why I was curious.
Congratulations. What's the story?
Well, actually, I had another cat. I had a cat and a dog, and I lost both of them in between 21 days in January. Like, it was not good. I still have one of my dogs. So I decided I needed to finally get another cat. So I went to the shelter, and I was looking for a black cat because I wanted one. And I ended up with Chester. Chester, turns out, and he had surgery, so he's kind of sequestered still. He had gotten neutered this week at the same time when I picked him up. So he went from being in a cage, being neutered, to coming to a new house where he can't really explore because he's not allowed to jump. But it turns out his name was Redwood. And the other day they had another cat up for adoption. It turns out he was one of 10 cats that was abandoned in a house.
Oh my God.
And so they found him when I went to the shelter and I went into the room and he was just like, he couldn't get enough love. So I was like, okay, you're coming home with me.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, and then this week, like I said, I found out his story about one of 10 cats and I'm like, I don't know why somebody would leave 10 cats behind, but unfortunately with the way the world is and the economy, I can see it, but it still breaks my heart that he was abandoned. But just like your Mona, she was abandoned and she found love, and that's what we want to do. So,
I can't imagine how she was abandoned. She's so amazing. So, sorry.
No, I mean that I had my neighbor's cat showed up at my other house. That's the one that passed in January. We had when we lived at another house, there was this little black cat with a little white spot on his chest. And I had a black cat already, and my neighbors were like, "Did you lose your cat?" I'm like, "No, my cat's inside." So one day I was outside, and this little guy comes sauntering up to me, and I'm like, "Okay." And he had a swagger. He had fallen out of a tree, I found out, but he had a swagger, kind of like Jack Sparrow, because he kind of just. So my husband's like, "Well, we can't keep him." I'm like, "Okay." And then the next thing I know, he's going to go get food, and he comes out with a cardboard box. I'm like, "What's that for?" Well, he needs shelter in case it rains or something. We already had cats. This is why we didn't bring it in right away. So he's like, well, let's color in some shelters. Nobody would take. And this is during the housing crisis. So we ended up bringing him in, and I tried calling him Midnight, tried calling him all these other things. Finally, I called him Tada. And he responded, and everybody's like, why Tada? I'm like, because he just showed up.
I love that.
Like magic.
I love that.
So, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like to add?
No, I I just want to thank you for asking insightful questions and for the fantastic conversation and just for your interest in the album and in the work I've done. It just means the world for me to be able to share that. And I just want to voice humble appreciation for anybody that listens, and it kind of blows my mind that people are interested, and just again express gratitude.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. Talking to Kieth was great. I know we got a little political at first, and sometimes people get a little upset that, I don't want to hear about politics. And I apologize if that's not your thing. But if you've listened to me for any length of time, you know that occasionally I will wade into that pool. And I think it's important, especially during this time. I'm recording this. It won't air for a while. I'm recording this on April 18th. And the fact of the matter is, we are still in this. I don't want to call it a war because technically it's not, because legally, that's why they haven't said it is, Operation whatever Fury, whatever the hell it is. Um, we have people making these decisions that most of us don't support. Most people in the world, I'm sure if you sat down and you asked them what they want, they would say they want a roof over their head. They want food on their table. They would like health care to stay healthy. They would like to have their family. They would like to have love. They would like to have compassion. And they would like to not be so stressed out. And this is something I wrote about not too long ago. I mentioned it in the profile or in the podcast. And it's one of those things where it's like, we want our basic needs met. And we don't want to be surveilled. And we don't want to have to not have an opinion. But we have a society that is constantly stressing us out. We have people, the younger generation, some of them can't afford rent. My first apartment, I paid $275 for. It was a one-bedroom apartment. And at the time, yeah, that was a little high, but it wasn't really. Um, and now, before I moved here, in my last hometown, which was a small town, a studio apartment was $900. Who's got that? And why do we keep raising the rents? Why do we keep doing this? Nothing's really changed. You have not approved that apartment. That apartment has not been redone since the whole time I lived there in the town in Harvard, but and it was Illinois, not Massachusetts. But the fact of the matter is, everybody else wants to raise the rent, so we're got to raise the rent. And when the rent goes up, well, the property value went up. So the property value and the property taxes go up. So then we got to raise the rent. And it's just this vicious cycle. And it's like, what you're doing is you have people living out of a car now. A person, and then they have to wonder if they're going to have a job because now we have AI. So we have to step back and really look at, dare I say, where the money's going. Who is profiting off of this? When we have companies basically being bought by investment firms because they want to load it with debt and then break it up. Watch the movie Wall Street. Greed is good. Gordon Gekko said it. And I've talked about this before prior. But the fact of the matter is, that movie, as Oliver Stone has said a couple of times, I did not make that movie as a playbook, but that's exactly what it turned into for several organizations that I will not name here. So we have to find a way to try to make it where a small group of people don't own everything. We have rights, a right to life, a right to be able to be happy, and Elon Musk came out recently and said, "Hey, you know what? By 2030, AI will have all the jobs and humans won't have to work anymore. We'll have to give you a government check." But then we can control everything. That's the subtext there. We don't talk about that. That's the subtext, that we will control everything. And if you say something we don't like, well, we can disappear you. We can turn off your power. You'll not get another check because you're a dissident. So how do we change the world? And I know, what does this have to do with Kieth? His interview got me thinking about that, because it's like, Imagine a world where technology has become the end all be all, and you can't be a creative anymore. You can't write. You can't make music. Well, you can, but nobody's going to hear it. You're not going to be able to share it with anybody because nobody's going to care because it's not the world. It's not AI. And the bigger thing is when you really want to think about it, and I know it sounds silly, but if you look at the movie Wall-E, and yes, it's a cartoon, but if you look at Wall-E, what were humans doing? They were in a recliner or a chair watching TV all the time. They weren't doing anything with their life. And at that point, going back to the Matrix, at that point, when does our human energy, our life force, because something's sustainable for somebody else to use it as feed, to use it as power, to use it as energy? And what are we left with? Where is our humanity going? Because both Musk and Bill Gates have said, we're not going to need humans. But a robot and artificial intelligence is never going to have compassion. They're never going to think as a human. And here's something scary that I didn't say on the podcast. A person said they had a friend, a lifelong friend for 30 years, and they knew that this person was using an AI program. I'm not going to name names, but they were feeding in any text messages, any things that she sent. The friend was feeding it into this to get an opinion. So she said she sat down and she wrote out this long piece and she put it into the program. And the program came back and said, oh, this person loves you and they're very compassionate and they care so much about you and everything else. And then she said, I changed the prompt. I said, I suspect this person's bad mouthing me. And that little sentence changed everything because the program came back and said, "Oh yeah, this friend's going to betray you. This friend." We don't look at those programs as something that is rot, brain rot. There's studies now that are showing it's brain rot. Same thing with social media, but it's brain rot. We're not thinking, we're not using our thought, we're not really knowing what we are doing because we're feeding it to this program. And this program's going to give us this information. This program's going to tell us how to think. But what happened to your critical thinking? What happened to your ability to think? And with AI usage up on social media, social media is created to be addictive. But what happens when it's all AI? And you're hearing it. You're hearing it with the fact that people don't want to pay for subscriptions anymore. They want the vinyl record. They want cassettes. They want to drop the subscriptions. They want to drop the social media. They want to go out and explore the world again and not have some influencer tell them, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to look. This is what you, because we are trying to get back to who we are, which we are human. We're not scientists. That is Keith's thing. But we need to get back to a human place. We need to get back to knowing music, understanding creativity, understanding art, and embracing that in ourselves and not saying, oh, I'm going to make a quick buck becoming the next big podcast or the next big novelist or the next big musician. I'm doing this because I love what I do. And yes, you're always competing against an algorithm, but you have to keep going forward and you have to understand that life is the most valuable thing. Your mind is a valuable tool. And to allow it to rot and not grow, well, you're wasting your energy, you're wasting your ability, your power, and your gift because there's nobody else like you. And even though we may have similar thoughts, there's always something slightly different and slightly different in who we are. So, on that note, I'd like to thank Keith for coming on the show. I'd like to thank Fast Susie for the intro and outro music. And as always, I'd like to thank you, the listener, because without you, I wouldn't have a podcast. Well, I'd have a podcast and I'd be shouting into the void, but it's a little bit fun knowing that somebody's listening because I want you guys to listen. I want you guys to interact. I want you guys to experience something different. And I want you to know that just because I'm in the good old USA doesn't mean I believe what's going on in the world here. It's just this is where I am and that's my circumstances. And, you know, if I could go anywhere in the world to travel right now, I would go to the UK, but I can't. My circumstances are what makes me here. And that's okay. It's all right because I'm where I'm supposed to be right now in my life. And I think we all are. So just hang in there, guys. Things will get better eventually. But, as they say, sometimes it's darkest before the dawn. So something new is coming. We just have to be patient with it and hang in there. So, like I said, I thank you guys for tuning in and I'll catch you next time. Bye.